for what he is going to say. And I love what King Solomon says in 1 Kings 3:9. When he's praying and getting ready to be king, he says, "Give your servant a hearing heart." I think it's so interesting because we pray all the time, and I know, and I'm speaking for myself as well, I pray all the time, God, I want an answer to this, or can you help me with my finances, because we all know we need help with the finances. Or God, what is my next step? Where am I going to go next? But there isn't a lot of time where we just sit and we listen. And because silence is uncomfortable, right? Silence can be scary sometimes. And so having a hearing heart is that idea of being able to just sit there and listen to God and listen to what he might say and follow his promptings. And as Pastor Farmer was saying a few minutes ago, the next step with it, or the third kind of meaning with akuo, is action. And so it's best summed up in Matthew 7:24 when it says, "Everyone then who hears these words of mine and does them will be like a wise man who built his house on a rock." Yeah. And so when we do hear those words, we hear that phrase, we hear that push to a certain way, then we have to stand on that. And we have to ask God, or we have to stand on it and be like, God, okay, this is it. This is where I'm going to be. I'm going to follow you, and I'm going to stand on what you have told me to do. And I know for me, there was a moment about a year and a half ago, and I know I've told a few of you guys this story, but even going back a few years ago, so 3 years ago we'll start, I kind of put my faith and my walk with God on the back burner. It's kind of wanting to just do my own thing, have a little bit of fun. Some friends of mine who lived back home, I wanted to kind of just have the life that they had, just carefree, not have to worry about anything. And it really started to take a downturn. And then a friend came in, and we started to hang out, and he kind of challenged me to be like, okay, well, why aren't you listening to God anymore? Why aren't you having time with God? And I was always saying I was angry at God. I was like, oh, well, I'm angry at God. And I was like, but there's no reason to be angry at God. And so I started reading this book by Brennan Manning, The Furious Longing of God. And I remember it clearly. It was in October of 2015. And I was living in a place that was extremely, extremely hard. Just the guy I was living with, it was not a good place to live. I felt burdened all the time. I never wanted to be home. I did everything possible to never be at my house. And I was reading this chapter where he tells the story of this nun who comes to his door at about 3 o'clock at night, because he was speaking at this church at the time. And she came up and she said, "Father, I have sinned. I need to make a confession." And he said, "Okay, I'll take your confession." And she says, I've been helping with communion now for a number of years, but I feel like I've tainted communion." And he says, "Okay, well, why? What happened?" She's like, "Well, when I was a young girl, I was sexually abused by my uncle. And since then, I have not been able to forgive him. And so I'm telling people to take communion, but I have not been able to forgive." And he sits there, and he sits in silence for a couple minutes, and he's like, "God, what am I going to do?" Or in his words, he says, Abba, what am I going to do?" And he finally gets this prayer, and he says, "Sister, for the next 30 days, all you are going to pray is, Abba, I belong to you." And the cool thing about that prayer is it's 7 syllables, and on average, your breath in and your breath out is going to be 7 syllables. So you breathe in Abba, and you breathe out, I belong to you. And so she told him to pray that. And after about 30 days, he got a letter from her, and it said, "I have now been able to forgive." And it took her that 30 days of praying that prayer to get that and find that forgiveness in God, and learn to hear God through all that. And there was this moment when I read it, and I just cried. I cried on my bed, and it was a silent cry, but I was screaming inwardly. Because I was like, I want to be able to pray that prayer and mean it. And know that I belong to you, and you hold me in your hands. And that you love me for who I am, And then January comes around, and I started to, my friend challenged me to ask God, what is that thing to stand on for the next year? What does 2016 have? And so the phrase that God gave me was, "Here I am." And so I started looking through the scriptures, and of course, the one that came up was 1 Samuel 3, 8 through 10. And so I'll read it to you guys real quick. It says, "And the Lord God called Samuel again a third time." At this point, God has said, "Samuel, Samuel," twice, and Samuel had always run to Eli, but because he did not know the voice of God this time. It said, "And he arose and went to Eli and said, 'Here I am, for you called me.' And then Eli perceived that the Lord was calling the boy. Therefore Eli said to Samuel, 'Go lie down, and if he calls you, you shall say, "Speak, Lord, your servant hears."' So Samuel went and laid down in his place, and the Lord came and stood, calling at the other time, 'Samuel, Samuel.' And Samuel said, 'Speak, for your servant hears.'" And so that now comes to, fast forward to just a couple months ago in January, and I asked God the same question. What is 2017? What am I going to stand on for 2017? And it was, your servant hears. Bad A there, I'm sorry. And so we're going through it, and then I began to ask God, well, how then can I have a tangible way? I do like tattoos. I have a few. I wore long sleeves, so this is a bad moment, but I have a few, and they remind me of moments in my life. They remind me of things that God has brought me through, and they remind me of promises that He has said. And so I was like, well, God, how can I do it? I don't want to get another tattoo. Like I said, finances are hard, and tattoos are expensive. And so He said to do this, just... And so I know a few of you have seen it, but on my wrists now every day, I put 3 dots with Sharpie. And so the left hand is "Here I am," and the right hand is "Your servant hears." But there's still another part of that, and we are going to get back to James, I do promise. But in Exodus 3, 2 through 4 is the moment when Moses sees the burning bush. And there's just this phrase. And it says, "And the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire out of the midst of the bush. He looked, and behold, the bush was burning, yet it was not consumed. And Moses said, 'I will turn aside to see this great sight, why the bush is not burned.' And when the Lord saw that he turned aside to see, God called him out of the bush, 'Moses, Moses.' And he said, 'Here I am.'" And so this idea of turning aside, it's not just going to be okay when you hear God and you hear His promptings and then you absorb it and you take action. You have to physically turn aside from what you've been doing, and you have to align yourself with what God has been saying. And that is when God then is going to reveal more. So for me, it was when I started putting the dots on my wrist, then He began to reveal more. The question I've been asking for a year and a half is, what, God, am I going to do with my life? I thought I was going to be a broadcaster. I thought I was going to be on the nightly news, anchoring. That's what I wanted to do. I wanted to tell the news. And then God was like, no, that's not what you're going to do. He said, you are going to pastor. Mm-hmm. And that scared me. Mm-hmm. That scared me a lot. And the first couple weeks of this class specifically, it was really hard to even accept that. But then there was a switch, and I just had to turn and follow and see what God had and look at Him and say, I know that what you have is going to be okay. And it's going to be better than okay, because it's going to be better than anything I could possibly come up with. You know, I can't be partial towards one person or another. I can't say I want to hang out with you and I want to learn about you and learn what you have, but not you, just because maybe we don't dress the same, or you're from the South and I'm from the North, or you come from a different country and I don't, or you really like one kind of food and I like this kind of food. You know, it doesn't matter. I have to always be open to talking to whoever it might be and listen to what God says, and even not be partial to what He might be saying to me in those moments. And so we have to have a heart after God's own heart. And so I want to end with a prayer from Brennan Manning. He has changed every moment and every part of my life because of his walk with God. He had some of the hardest moments that I have ever read about in my entire life, from sleeping in a stairwell and getting kicked by someone and breaking 2 of his ribs because they said, he's worthless, he sleeps on the street. Speaking perfectly about that partiality. You know, it blows my mind. And so he talks about this idea of Abba, I belong to you. That prayer really defines his life. But I believe that also goes with here I am. Here I am is that idea of I belong to you, because you have to be willing to just move where God wants you to move in those moments. But he also has a prayer, and he talks about how here I am and Abba, I belong to you, also tying perfectly with thy will be done. We have to be willing to do whatever God says and where his will is and be fully open to that. And so, as I close, I want to read this prayer opening. He says, "Dear Abba, I say the Our Father every day. The phrase, thy will be done, rolls off my tongue with little or no effort. Yet I see those are words I cannot diddle with. They are more than words. They are a vow. I believe the marriage vows to be important enough, but how many times today did I break this vow because I went to great lengths to avoid any hint of martyrdom? If I saw it, I ran scared, a coward forgetting that the only way the seed can grow is if it is buried deep beneath the surface. I will still pray thy will be done, but I may pray it a little slower from now on. That phrase scares me, Lord." Thank you, guys.